One of the most illogical, nonsensical things about the current NFL game and league that really just drives me nuts is that on the one hand, everybody acknowledges, owns, accepts, agrees universally that quarterback is the most important position in football and in North American professional sports. There's not a ton of argument about this. Like, everybody's pretty much in alignment. Everybody pretty much agrees. Yet, for some reason that is unbeknownst to me, the vast majority of NFL teams will only carry 2 quarterbacks on their active roster because they want to have a roster spot available for some fucking scrub-ass special teamer. The short-term versus long-term stuff. If quarterback is the most important position in the game, which everybody acknowledges and everybody agrees, then you should continually invest in that position, even if you found that guy. Like the Packers for years invested effort and energies in the quarterbacks that backed up Brett Favre. You know, from the Mark Brunells of the world, Ty Detmers, the Matt Hasselbacks, the Doug Petersons, I can go on. The point I'm getting at here is you invest in that position behind him because you're building bench strength, because you never know what happens. That guy might be there and gone tomorrow, but even if they are, then you could potentially leverage what you do behind your primary quarterback and turn that into future draft pick capital, create greater security for yourself at the quarterback position. You could also give yourself built-in options at the backup position that are going to cost you cheaper than having to go out in the free agent market. I'm going on and on. But the way it looks with today's NFL is that if you don't take a quarterback in the first 4 rounds, you might as well not even bother. Because typically, most teams are going to cut that quarterback, hope that they make it to the practice squad, and it's just nonsensical to me. Whereas I think you should be looking to invest consistently in that position. And that on day 3, you might not find a ton of guys that are going to be long-term, high-end starters in the league, but you can still find solid backups, quality backups, guys that can be high-end backups and potentially low-end or even spot bridge types of starters. And every once in a while, you can find a solid starter there. It's almost like teams with their approach shouldn't even bother drafting guys after round 4 at this position, which to me is absolutely ridiculous. If anything, you should be looking on day 3 of the draft for value guys, somebody that could potentially outplay their draft position. And I look at somebody like a Shane Buechele, and I say this is somebody that has a little bit of a potential to potentially outplay his draft position, assuming that he even gets drafted to begin with. I will say first, when I hear the name Buechele, it always harkens back to the days of former Texas Rangers third baseman Steve Buechele, and makes me feel a little old knowing that I watched his daddy play baseball back in the day. He used to have his baseball cards and all of that. And now I'm watching his son, you know, whose lifelong dream was to play quarterback apparently, and now he's got a shot to make it professional on his own. Like, that's pretty freaking cool. And you look at him, he started off his career at Texas before eventually losing the starter job to Sam Ehlinger, so he ended up transferring and going to SMU, and it was probably the best thing he could have ever done for himself. You know, like Ehlinger ended up being the guy in Texas, and Buechele was able to go to SMU, and I think put himself into a situation where he's at least in the conversation to be drafted. And I look at him as a prospect and I say, you know, there are things to like here. He's obviously not the biggest guy in the world. He's kind of an average athlete, which for a guy of his size, you'd like him to have a little bit more movement skills, a little more running ability, a little more natural mobility, agility, scrambling ability. But he has enough. Like, he's not a total stiff back there. He's just not really a game breaker as a runner. If he was a game breaker as a runner, or a much better runner at least, we'd be talking about him probably in a little bit of a different light. But the reality is, when you look at him as a passer, you know, I don't think the talent cupboard is totally bare. And I could envision potentially him not going drafted, but I think he is absolutely worthy of a draft pick. He has slightly above average arm strength. So to be able to draft a guy on day 3 that has slightly above average arm strength and slightly above average accuracy, you know, those aren't the worst tools to have. No, he doesn't have a cannon for an arm, but I think he does have enough arm to make most, if not all, of the required NFL throws. He can certainly put some zip on the ball, especially in short and intermediate throws. He's a guy that can sit there and demonstrate some level of quality in terms of his ball placement. And he can get a little scattered at times, but he's also shown some ability to make some great throws in terms of fades and back shoulders and, etc. Like, the talent cupboard's not bare. He's a guy that demonstrated at least a little bit of an ability to go through some of his progressions, be able to get off of his primary read, be able to process what he sees and react relatively quickly to that. A guy that, you say, okay, I like some of those traits. Like, they project well to the NFL. They carry over well to the NFL. He doesn't maybe necessarily have a special trait or something that you really hold your hat onto and say, like, if he has a chance to make it and he has a chance to be a long-term starter in the league, this is the trait that he has. He doesn't really have that. He almost kind of like a Brett Rippon in that sense, but I think Brett Rippon was a more accurate thrower. But the point I'm getting at here is, I look at this type of guy and I say, yes, he's lacking an elite trait. Yes, he has several areas in terms of my grading scale that look like he's kind of average. He gets a little happy-footed in the pocket sometimes, doesn't stand as tall as he should. Like I mentioned, he's kind of an average athlete. Decision-making, sometimes he will just risk it for the biscuit, or sometimes you need to, but sometimes he's got to learn to play a little more within the system, play within what the defense may give him. And then mechanically, I think this is actually probably his biggest fault, is that he too often gets in too much of a rush because of what he sees, and his arm and the rest of his body just aren't in sync. He makes a lot of off-platform throws, does a poor job of stepping into his throws, utilizing his feet and his lower body in his throwing motion. And that may or may not be something that you're going to be able to coach up out of him and correct out of him. And it would certainly be something that I would anticipate NFL coaches would want to work with him on quite a bit, because if you improve some of those mechanics, I think as a byproduct, you improve the arm strength a little bit, and you certainly, I think, would improve the consistency as a passer, and therefore taking that slightly above average accuracy and ball placement and making it a little bit better. Now, some of you are going to sit there and say, well, he couldn't even beat out Ellinger for the job at Texas, so why the hell would I want him? Well, there's different situations, different times. I pointed out a couple videos back, I think, talking about Felipe Franks, and I was talking about the whole Joe Flacco situation. Like, it was something people used to say about, well, he couldn't even hold down and win the starting job at Pittsburgh. Why the hell would you want him? Had to go to Delaware. Sometimes it's about coaches and situations and systems, etc. And, sometimes coaches are just dumb. Now, here's what I'll say is that Buechele and Ellinger are kind of similar to me in terms of their talent level, in terms of their NFL prospects. So it just happened to be that maybe Ellinger was a little bit of a better athlete, which he certainly was, and that might have been the tiebreaker as to what helped him get and hold on to that starting job. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't take a look at Shane Buechele. Like, when I see him, I see a guy, some elements of Ryan Fitzpatrick, some elements of Case Keenum, and kind of talking about on the high end of the scale there. Two guys, they were both in their cases undrafted, that have bounced around the league a lot, but they've had long careers, made themselves decent money, guys that you like having in the fold as a higher-end backup that could potentially be a low-end spot bridge type of starter that can actually go in there and win you a few games. Both of these guys, both Ryan Fitzpatrick and Case Keenum, have done that in their careers. Guys that lack that real, special physical trait, especially in the case of Ryan Fitzpatrick, sometimes he'll risk it for the biscuit a little bit and you get some of those YOLO throws. But damn, I look at a guy like a Shane Buechele and I see somebody that in the middle of day 3, somewhere in the 5th or 6th round, teams should be a little intrigued by. Especially if you've got a young starting quarterback already that you've drafted and that you're developing. I look at a guy like Buechele and I say, that's a guy that I want to bring into the system. I want to work with him over the next 3 or 4 years and have him there as potentially a low-cost backup alternative. Because he can play. He's got some arm talent. He's not barren in that category. He's not a total stiff. He's not a great athlete, but he's not a total stiff. And these are the types of guys that end up going undrafted that just boggle my mind. They should absolutely be drafted. And they should absolutely, at least worst case scenario, be the third quarterback on somebody's roster, because you want to keep these guys and draft them, cultivate them, develop them, and see what you've got in a couple of years. I guarantee you that if given equal footing and equal opportunity, that Shane Buechele would be better than at least a couple of the quarterbacks that were drafted ahead of him this year if he was actually given the same type of opportunity. I could just tell you that. But I like him. He's enough to where, I like him enough to where in the middle of day 3, like I said, I would be pounding the table for my team to take him.